everybody, and welcome to WCN's Closer Look. We're so glad that you could join us. My name is Zoe. I am a Senior Programs Manager here at WCN, and I'll be your host today. Please remember that you can put your questions in the chat or the Q&A feature, and we'll try and get to all of them by the end. And also, we'll be posting the recording of today's talk on our YouTube page. It is my pleasure today to introduce you all to Dr. Rachel Graham, a conservation scientist with over 28 years on projects around the world. And she's also the founder and executive director of MarAlliance, an international organization dedicated to the research and conservation of large marine mammals, such as sharks, rays, turtles, and large finfish. Today, she will be telling us how her team has spent a decade protecting marine ecosystems and engaging local communities to change commercial fishing practices. She will also dive into what it takes to turn these shark hunters into shark stewards to make sure that these ancient predators have a future as long as their history. Over to you, Rachel.
There we go. Wonderful. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And hello, everybody. It's absolutely fabulous to see you today. And I'm seeing in the chat that everybody's rather cold. So I'm sending you a lot of warmth and heat and sun from Panama, where I'm speaking to you today. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen, and I want to get going and tell you a little bit more about how we work to transition fishers to stewards. So let me just this. Okay. Okay, bear with me a second because I cannot see the actual webinar when I'm actually showing you the, there we go. Perfect. Lovely. And lovely. Good. I hope everybody can see this. So yes, good day. I'm so pleased you're joining us. Really nice way to start the year and talking about something that's been really positive in our work at MarAlliance. It's even beyond the last 10 years. I've been working with traditional fishers now for 25 years. And I want to talk a little bit about why fishers may want to actually move into more of a stewardship role from just small scale or semi-commercial fishing. So we want to go, one of our key aims is to go from pure commercial fishing over to stewardship to this, whereby fishers are fully engaged in actually supporting the conservation of especially threatened or endangered species, like some of the long-lived sharks and more. And you might ask, well, why would we need to make this change? Why do we need to urge a change? Small-scale fishers are usually, according to a lot of folks who just see them out on the sea, they couldn't be possibly creating such damage to fisheries and catching so many fish, etc. But in fact, what we found is that there's about 112 million people engaged in small-scale fisheries around the world. There's 32 million small-scale fishers, and they represent a very large proportion of the fisheries ongoing today. And these fisheries have actually led to the loss of 90% of big fish over the last 50 years. In fact, it's thought that it's been calculated that about 1 in 5 fish that are caught today are actually caught illegally through unregulated, unreported, and illegal fishing. And a lot of the folks who are conducting a lot of the IUU fishing nearby are small-scale fishers and fisheries. And it's not necessarily because they want to, it's just because there's not a lot of monitoring that's going on with the small-scale fisheries. And thereby, you're seeing also a lot of local depletions of these large fish and fisheries. And it's impacting fishers considerably, not only in terms of their food security and their local economies, their ability to advance socially, economically, politically. And so I am, so that gives you an idea of why we want to focus on working with fishers and moving them away from more harmful, unsustainable fishing practices into more of a stewardship, management, sustainable fisheries role. But you might ask why we work specifically with small-scale fishers. Well, one of the first things is they are the ones who are absolutely on the front lines with respect to the sea. They see what's going on. They're the first ones who can actually affect any changes. They're often in the nearshore coastal areas where the greatest diversity of species occur, where the highest level of small-scale fisheries tends to occur. And they are the ones who are going to see governments come and go, bureaucracies unchange, etc. over time. They're the ones who are there in permanence. So it's really important if we're looking to make changes in fisheries, we're trying to overarchingly reduce fishing effort, because that is really the only way that we're going to be able to bring back some of these species and populations and ensure more sustainable fisheries and fish for the future, is if we lower effort. And you're not going to lower effort unless it's a collaborative and collective effort. And so for that, you need to create engagement and inclusion. And often the fishing sector and the NGO or conservation sector have been kind of poles apart. And so this is something that really bringing fishing and NGO sectors, and especially the research sector, together. The academia has long eschewed kind of traditional knowledge, and now they're starting to see that, in fact, traditional knowledge is incredibly important and has given us a long timelines of information on fisheries and key habitats that we never had because the science didn't exist. So it's not only we work with fishers to create engagement and inclusion, but it also enables us to have this collaborative access to sites, species, long-term data as well. And it's that valuation of traditional knowledge that has been so critical to being able to advance collective goals and co-developing solutions for the sea. It's this creation of long-term grassroots partnerships that is a fundament to the work that we do, because we do believe in the permanency, and we are really keen to see how changes evolve over time with our colleague fishers. Many of the species we work with are K-selected species with slow life histories, very late to mature, either in the late like 5, 6, 7 years for groupers, snappers, into the teens for a lot of shark species, and even older for turtles. And we're really, really keen to see how we're not just proposing solutions or co-proposing solutions without coming up with alternatives, but actually defining how we can better support fishing communities into the next decades. So you can only determine how one can support these communities if you're working hand in hand with traditional fishers. This approach also ensures that there is a growing trust. If there's transparency, there's growing trust. If there's co-creation, co-development of projects and solutions, it tends to lead to stewardship, and especially of threatened species that we tend to focus on. And of course, a key reason we love to work with fishers and fisher partners is because we're a small group, and many NGOs are just a small group. We can unlock a lot of doors to a more global setting, but if we're to replicate or even scale solutions that have been co-developed or fully created by our fisher partners, the best way to do it is through fisher communities and fisher networks. Because again, there are 32 million small-scale fishers in the world. So we definitely have a lot of fishers to work with on replication and scaling abilities. So we're really seeking to find that win-win solution. It's absolutely critical, not just for the fish, for the fishers, for the fisheries and food security. So it's that kind of triple win-win solution that we're looking for, but ultimately, we are going to have to find a way to reduce fishing effort. And you cannot ask people to reduce their effort if this is their only source of income, if you don't come up with other solutions, proposals, alternatives, supplements, and more. And better that it be, again, co-created. And that only comes about when you create those relationships. So I mentioned why we work with fishers, but why do fishers work with us? Clearly, income. In many cases, they need to make money. We all do. So, and especially if you're asking them to maybe shift some of their fishing practices, they definitely need to make sure that they're supplementing their income so that they can fill that pay gap. Great. But there's another thing too. A lot of time, fishers have down seasons where they can't fish. For example, in the Mesoamerican Reef, you have lobster closures. So lobster fishers can't fish during certain months of the year. And they struggle actually making ends meet in some of the other fisheries or some of the other supplements that they have. So working with us in monitoring and science and conservation work is actually an income generator. There's a huge amount of curiosity. And I always like to say that especially patriarch fishers have PhDs in the sea. And this curiosity is such a powerful thing when it comes together, when you've got the scientists and you've got that traditional knowledge from the fishers, you're out to kind of answer those questions together that have kind of mystified fishers or mystified scientists. So it's a really powerful, it's a powerful collaboration. In working with conservation groups, scientific groups, you also have some advancement on the social front. You may gain more income, you have a greater voice, more exposure, either through media, communications, etc. And that gives you sometimes a better soapbox to stand on to advocate for more fishing rights or more sustainable fisheries. So that's very important. Building skills is de rigueur with fishers who work with us. They learn a whole host of different skills, and I'll be going over some of those. And also a safety net. So when things go pear-shaped, big flooding, there's a hurricane, pandemic. Funnily enough, MarAlliance, and we know that several other NGOs have been in the same situation, we basically pivot and we help provide a safety net when a lot of the times governments or other organizations or institutions are unable to come to their help. So it shows that flexibility and innovation in NGOs can also be a really big support in providing safety nets in a sector that doesn't have a lot of safety. And the improved well-being really comes from these supportive networks where fishers don't feel isolated anymore. We're facilitating networks within and amongst countries, so they're no longer alone, and it really helps them. It really helps them get beyond certain issues. And there has been a lot of issues with seeing declining fisheries, changes in habitats, and it has led for some to depression. It has led to really pessimistic outlooks on the future. And so having a network where they seem to have support has been very helpful. And then finally, opportunities for the children. I have to say I've surveyed hundreds of fishers, and there is not a single fisher when I have asked them, there's not a single fisher who has responded that they wanted their children to be a fisherman when I've asked them that question. So this is a new option for them in terms of career. So that was a bit of a long reason of why fishers work with us, and there are many other reasons, but these are some of the top reasons that were shared with me over the course of many years. And just to let you know, you can't just work with fishers in that transitioning from commercial fishing over to stewards if you only focus on research, for example, or you only focus on fisheries assessment, or you only focus on livelihoods development. You need this entirety of approaches in order to reach the goal of rewilding the seas for the benefit of fish, fisheries, and fishers. So I just show this to show all the different axes in which we try to integrate and engage fishers. So even in policy support, management, and even implementation of conventions through the data that is gathered. So basically, we want to, one of the first ways that we do, I see, there we go. One of the best ways of engaging fishers and starting on that transition process is really improving the understanding of threatened species and reducing their capture and involving in the science, in the monitoring, and doing that kind of co-creation of how do we move forward with these conservation science projects. And one of the best ways of doing so is actually just immediately hands-on. There's no sense in sitting in a classroom or whatever and lecturing away. No, right out into the boat and spending hours together where we go over a lot of the information that you might have in a typical classroom setting and more, but really working with their skills firsthand, but shifting them away from we're not out to kill the shark or the fish. We're out to try and do everything we can to keep that animal alive. And then if you capture it in the future, fair enough. What do you do when you capture it? Well, we need X and Y, Z information, and this is how it needs to be collected, and this is why. And then they're part of that entire chain as well. And so there's bit by bit, there's a real understanding of the scientific process, why and how we take data, and how these data get transformed into management, into policies, and much more, and even quotas for fisheries. So the best bit out of it is that once everybody learns this on our at sea learning, our at sea schools in traditional pangas, we then take this, we ask them, okay, please share all of this knowledge and teach everybody else that you come across. And so we often do these fisher swaps, which have been incredibly impactful. It's fishers teaching fishers. So you see a growth in confidence and knowledge. And we're there to facilitate these opportunities. Like I mentioned, there's only so much of us, but there's many fishers. And fishers want to hear from fishers what's going on. And there's even greater level of trust when fishers hear from fishers the state of a fishery or why science is being used or how to actually gather and analyze and interpret data. So we're trying to facilitate all the processes so that they can take on all of those roles. And for everything from the collection of data in water to actually dealing with cutting edge technologies. I love it. I love to work on spatial ecology tracking of sharks, turtles, and more. And I love figuring out, so what am I going to do with this tag and how are we going to attach it and everything? But so much better, I get the tag, we have a problem, how are we going to attach it? What are we going to do? What are your thoughts on how we're going to manage this project? We sit down, we figure it out, and then they work with the technology. And so we've all got buy-in into the future of the project. And this is incredibly important, again, for establishing those long-term linkages and understanding of science. And what I found over the course of the many years working with hundreds of fishers is that they learn this, they learn a lot of techniques, and then they pass them on to others, and then they're like, okay, what's the next challenge? Now what? And so literally we're moving those who want to, those who are curious and really want a big challenge, and who may not have the highest level of literacy. We're moving them into computer work and data, not just data entry, but data analyses and data interpretation and so much more. And then they have to take this and train others as well. And so we supervise and watch that to make sure that, we're quality checking, et cetera. But it's incredible to see how this is then permeated into their families and communities. And one of our key questions to them is, can you find more fabulous, talented people who would be really excited to join this type of work and maybe shift their career, especially with younger fishers, because many of the older fishers see the writing on the wall, they see the declining fisheries, and they want to make a change, and they would like to try and keep some of the younger fishers out of the fishery, or at least if they're in it, get them moved out. And if it's not in fisheries independent monitoring, where we're not capturing and killing the animals, but it's actually in the fisheries themselves, which is a very male-dominated sector, you still have a lot of jobs available. And it's really important to highlight how important jobs are in these sectors to show that conservation and science pays. And it doesn't just pay the academics and the NGOs, it pays at the community level. And so you're not just getting a cohort of folks in different communities to do their own landings instead of hauling in university students and more. You can maybe have one university student who's doing their thesis. Maybe they originated from that particular community, but you're actually having the fishers themselves or their families actually helping. And through these landings work, they also understand and get to know a different form of science. For example, the age and growth of fish. Why would you be worried about a particular fishery if all of your fish are this big? Well, because none of them have reached maturity, therefore they cannot reproduce. How do you know they're not mature? Well, let's teach you about staging, reproductive staging of the gonads, and then you can tell exactly when they're about to spawn. Let's show you a little bit more about how we do age and growth using otolith sectioning. And so they've been part and parcel of all of that. And now there's this incredible growth in understanding of how fish are growing, when they're mature. And it's that science coupled with their traditional knowledge of where these fish are, when, in what quantities, or they're seeing kind of declines or reductions in sizes, that's so powerful to make them agents of change for fisheries management and help them support more sustainable fisheries measures. And it's not just age and growth, it's not just reproductive condition, but it's also looking at stomach analysis. Many fishers we worked with in Gunayala and the indigenous Gunayala in Panama did not realize that, for example, lionfish are incredibly impactful to small local reef fish, which can have a knock-on effect with reef health. So when you start to do stomach analysis and you start looking at the diversity of fish that they're eating, huge impacts. But you would only know that if you see it and you do it yourself. And as a result of this, we did actually have local students who then ended up doing their theses on this. And so there's a lot of pride because, again, these are local indigenous fishers working with students from their indigenous communities as well. And in working with cooperatives, that's a great way of being able to meet a lot of fishers and still get a lot of data and bring a lot of those results back to a broader fisher cohort. And again, if it's not just the fishers that we can work with, because they don't have a lot of time once they've been fishing, work with their families. It's a very male-dominated sector. And so where can we engage and integrate women more? Women and girls, it's usually either in the management and cooperatives, but also in this kind of fisheries dependent monitoring, so monitoring of landings and more. And so this is how we're also finding some incredibly talented community folks, and again, agents of change, who the most talented then go on to train other people in other communities. And this is all so important. It's this kind of transfer of knowledge and growth and replication and being part of something much larger that then helps us to push or facilitate, not necessarily push, but to facilitate real shifts in how we fish, and especially the use of unsustainable fishing gears. So, here we've got a thresher shark in a net, and in fact, nets are considered some of the most unsustainable fishing gears on the planet. They catch everything, whether you're protected or not protected, whether it's a closed season or open season, it doesn't matter. And if we're trying to reduce fishing effort, one of the first places to start is with nets. And in Belize, we managed with a collective called the Coalition for Sustainable Fisheries to get one of the first national bans on nets, on fishing nets in the country. And we're already starting to see a comeback of certain species, not only in terms of the numbers at certain sites, like you see this image from an baited remote underwater video, got 7 sharks on the shot. We've never seen anything like it before. But we're also seeing species that we very, very rarely see, like the critically endangered great hammerhead, which we were so pleased to be able to catch several and put satellite tags on to be able to track. And it's not just me that gets excited about this by far.
Ready, 1, do the tail. Do the tail. 2, 3.
Go, swim free. Whoa.
I'm always excited when I see that because it's one of my favorite things. Because we've got 4 fishers in the boat and myself, and they were even more excited and emotional about it than I was. And that was a 12-foot hammerhead, great hammerhead, and one of my favorite species. And we found a little bit more about its habitat preferences over the months that it was satellite tagged. And it's not just sharks. It's also very large, long-lived species like turtles. And this was all run by fishers. They know how to catch the turtles. Ivan, who you see on the left in the white shirt, I was like, you're really good at catching turtles. And this is the first time I've seen you do this. And he goes, no, it's not the first time. So, going from turtle coaching to, and there you see this big male. You can see the long tail, big male with satellite tag on it. So really it's these shifts in behaviors and engagement and inclusion. And really where we're at now is many of these incredible fisher partners are now training everybody else. So we're just trying to facilitate processes and really help to align everybody so that we can more readily face a fairly uncertain future where we are seeing declining fisheries, and trying to instill hope and find ways of reversing that decline and doing it collectively through the co-creation of these science-based conservation programs. And if we can't bring the people to the field, we take the field to the people. And that includes fishers who never get underwater, because there are many fishers who actually don't swim at all. And then teachers and students, and we want to inspire that next generation. And then also giving that confidence so that they're in a position to be able to actually advocate for fishers and stand up in front of decision makers and more. This is Hilmar Salazar, who is actually giving the interpretation of the results from the Guna Yala lionfish work to members of the Guna Congress in Panama. So as we retreat in our role and facilitate these changes, it's really exciting to see. It's exciting to see the engagement, and it's exciting to see the stewardship taking place. And this is also because it's not just we make the decisions. No, these are co-created decisions. These are 45 members of our AGM, including our board, our annual general meeting. And it's a mix. It's the board, it's team members, it's our fisher partners all coming together to revise our strategy for the next 4 to 5 years, our action plan, and more. So we really, we put our effort where our mouth is, where our mouth is. And just very quickly, in terms of outputs and outcomes, We've trained hundreds of fishers. We always ask fishers, please find more talented folks. We want to bring them on. Hundreds, if not thousands, of students at this point across 9 countries, many new skills, this new interaction with scientists and being able to show that traditional knowledge is very much valued. Huge behavioral and attitudinal changes from, oh, we caught a shark, we're going to kill it immediately, to how can we let it go because it's really not our target catch. And we've learned now how to handle these animals. And a lot of this kind of horizontal transfer of information. One of the aspects too that we're working with some of the fishers in Micronesia on is added value to catches. If you can only catch so much fish, well, how do we add value to your catch so you can earn more money? And what we're finding when we're asking our fisher partners is that the work that they do with us collectively is offsetting 10 to 25% of their annual salaries in fisheries. That's considerable. This means that this is near a career for many fishers and a very strong supplemental income, not necessarily an alternative. We've never asked people for it to be a complete alternative because all the fishers we've met love the sea, and the sea is an integral part of who they are and their identity. We do provide that safety net, which is absolutely key. During the pandemic, we supported 22 fishing families, no questions asked over the course of 5 months. And we've provided a lot of kind of ad hoc support to others where necessary, so they know they can turn to us if a crisis occurs. And this has happened, unfortunately, several times in everybody's lives because we do work with many fishing families. They have more confidence, a seat at the table, stronger positioning and parts of committees, really lovely to see. And that the policy and conservation outcomes that we're seeing, many of them were, if not fisher-led, at least fisher-integrated and fisher-pushed or promoted. So where are we going with all of this in the next 5 years? We are currently working in 5 countries. We would like to expand our networks to 7 countries, a lot more exchanges between countries, finding a lot more talent, reducing fishing effort, especially by reducing net use if possible, continuing to co-develop additional streams of income, because this is absolutely critical. We need to find ways of actually capping the number of fishers who enter into the fishery, but that is a government decision, but they need to determine that there needs to be some kind of capping. It's called managed access in some places, etc. But that's the only way we're going to be able to handle a reduction in fishing effort. And we want to make sure that through all of this work with building confidence and leadership and communication skills and media skills and more, that they're more able to effectively work with managers and policymakers, especially in terms of engagement on decision making. And we're very keen to see the next generation of local conservationists arise, especially the sons and daughters of fishers, who are often highly challenged because they just don't have the money for tuition. So we launched a scholarship program just recently for the sons and daughters of fishers across multiple countries. So we can tell you definitely more about that. So I would just say with that, consider joining us in one way or another on our journey to catalyze change. Let me just go back to what our slide was, for not just a change for species, but also for people. And I wanna leave you with this really lovely recent video. This is the critically endangered large-toothed sawfish in Panama. Fishers we've been working with in the remote Darien region. They caught baby sawfish, and they're now releasing them as opposed to just keeping them and cutting off the saw. So that's kind of some of the behavioral change that I was mentioning that we're really pleased to see increasingly adopted. So work with us to secure a future for marine wildlife. There are many ways that you can do it. Either you can sponsor long-term wildlife monitoring, which engages a lot of our fisher partners and ensures supplemental income. Join one of our incredible expeditions. They're not necessarily cheap, but again, it goes to supporting a lot of our fisher partners, all the long-term monitoring and much more. And it's an unbelievable life-changing experience. I have many people who can testify to that. And then, of course, we have our scholarship fund, which is officially launching at the start of February. So do consider supporting these if you want to support changes in the oceans with small-scale fishers. So on behalf of my entire team at MarAlliance, I want to thank you very much for taking some time to listen to this presentation today. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was amazing. And there's some questions in the chat and the Q&A feature. Keep putting those in. And to get us started, I'll read a question from Mohammed, who's asking, what are the ethical considerations surrounding the use of emerging technologies, such as gene editing, in the context of fish conservation, and how should it be addressed in conservation policies?
That's a great question that I don't think I can answer, to be honest, because I don't work on genetics.
Mohammed?
Sorry, Mohammed.
Cool. Another question is from Tom, who says, it seems your focus is on artisanal fishers, but what about the industrial fishers, some of which are state supported and do great damage?
Absolutely. So that's a really good point. So we have to pick our battles. We have to pick what we can work with as a small group. And what we found is that the greatest diversity and the biggest area of intervention is the nearshore coastal areas where the small scale fishers and not necessarily the large industrialists reside or fish. And so we made I made a decision many years ago to focus on small scale fishers. Now, that said, we do have issues with overlap of industrial fishers and small scale fishers. And this is where having small scale fishers develop more confidence and a larger voice and leadership capacities, and they know how to communicate with the media, puts them in a much stronger position to be able to advocate for their communities and their fisheries with governments. And fishers have a strong voice, but they don't always know how to rally, come together and use it well for the benefit of small scale fisheries versus the industrials. So we work a little bit towards helping to rectify that imbalance in that way. And then there are other organizations that are doing a really amazing job at trying to tackle some of the big issues with industrial fishers, internationally, for example, Oceania, and then of course, some of the governments that are overseeing some of the industrial fisheries. Not all of them, unfortunately, but yeah.
Perfect. The next question is, you mentioned something about turtles, and I wanted to know, why are turtles so affected by climate change, and what other species are currently hard hit by climate change and will continue to be?
So I think turtles are really hit by climate change mainly, and especially male turtles, we think, because when females nest on the beaches, the sand temperature will determine the sex of the turtles, the baby turtles. And as we have rising heat, sand temperatures are rising, we're seeing an increasing number of nests producing female turtles. So that's already impacting the potential number of male turtles that we're going to have out there. And we may not see the impact immediately, but it may be over the longer term as temperatures rise. And not only that, as climate change impacts us and we see rising sea levels, we're also seeing more coastal erosion and the loss of beaches. Loss of beaches meaning that turtles have nowhere to nest, or their nests may be flooded more frequently by high tide or storm events. So this is how this can impact turtles. There's many other ways that climate change is impacting species, from their ability to actually detect prey to even their ability to be able to come together at the right time and using temperature as a cue to spawn and reproduce, like, for example, Nassau groupers in the Caribbean.
Perfect. Megan would like to know if you're just dealing with a lot of if you are dealing with a lot of shark depredation issues and retaliatory or preemptive killings, or if the shark issues you're dealing with are more related to targeted fishing or bycatch.
Great question. So almost all of our aspects of working with sharks tends to be focused on targeted fisheries for sharks or bycatch, not retaliatory killings. Shark populations have declined to such a degree that we don't really have a lot of sharks out there to begin with. But it does raise an important point, which is if our hope is to restore populations, not just of finfish, but also of sharks, we are going to have more sharks out there. So we're going to have to learn to live with them more, and we're going to have to understand them better. And that's why some of the work that we do, and especially working with fishers so we can dispel a lot of myths and fear, is absolutely key and critical. But for right now, it's mainly been a focus on working with shark fishers or shark bycatch and other fisheries.
Awesome. Caleb says he would like to work in East Asia to conserve humphead, but he also loves educating kids and would love to do outreach programs in schools. So he wants to know, how do you reach out to schools to conduct educational opportunities for kids, and what permission or regulations do local governments require?
Okay, so a couple of things. One of the things that we really suggest and promote is that we have local educators. So if that person is from that area, fantastic. If not, facilitate a process whereby you find local educators. And you want to talk to, if it's in communities, you want to talk to the community elders, you want to talk to the teachers, you want to find out what the curricula is. You want to make sure that you're not imposing something that just really does not function at that community or regional level. And you want to be able to interface with the Ministry of Education representatives, because in every country you have them. So bring everybody together, work with the teachers, and then set out how you can maybe integrate some of these aspects like shark conservation, etc., within the curriculum that's already established. So, and that will win you a lot of friends in the educational aspect, as opposed to kind of maybe overstepping boundaries, especially in local communities.
Thank you. Another question is, why would these fishers work with you at all?
Oh, good. So there's multiple reasons, and I've actually asked them. So part of it is there is the income, like I mentioned at the start of the talk. So income is very key, and that's usually one of the first starts. It's like, wow, during the closed season for sharks or lobsters or conch or these finfish species that we tend to work with, where are we getting our money? Hey, we can work on monitoring, conservation, science, etc. Great. And what might start out as a supplementary income ends up being a partnership, and then it's just satisfying curiosity, and then knowing that there's some stability in this kind of work is also very helpful. And there's multiple means. The relationships that develop between all of us, it's seen as a network, it's seen almost like a family. So that's really important, because we've really grown this network of fishers into literally a multi-country family. And there are many other reasons, but I listed some of them in the slide earlier on in the presentation.
Perfect. Raymond says, building this community with a larger voice and leadership, will it help with the mission to change the behaviors of larger industrial fisheries? And most importantly, do we know how to identify the needs from these large industrial fisheries and how to negotiate and arrive at environmentally sustainable compromises?
Those are really good questions. I think there's a lot to be said for supporting those horizontal informational processes that builds up, again, the knowledge base for many fishers, even if they're small scale, many small-scale fishers. There's portions of the families that are working in industrial fisheries as well. And there will be kind of I don't want to say trickle down, but there will be an effect where they're going to also be educating the industrial fishers. But there's a different dynamic going on with industrial fisheries. There's a lot of incentives. There's a lot of tie-ins to foreign exchange abilities. So a lot of small-scale fisheries aren't necessarily boosting a country's foreign exchange and getting it out of foreign debt, whereas industrial fisheries is. So it's a very different class of people, from the owners of the boats, who are often actually quite wealthy, and a few owners own a whole suite of boats and have very strong ties in government. You need a different approach in working with industrial fisheries and fishers, but I think we can go a long way towards helping facilitate small-scale fishers talking to industrial fishers, especially with this growing of confidence, leadership, communication, and being able to allow them, facilitating that engagement, and then having industrial fishers understanding the impacts that they have on the small-scale fisheries, especially in usual traditional small-scale fishing zones. Because as I mentioned, there is overlap sometimes when industrial fishers should not be in the nearshore coastal zones, and yet they are. So yeah, it's all about communication, and we're working towards trying to facilitate more communication between groups. But that's one group that we need to try and help small-scale fishers talk to more.
Awesome. So I know, being a conservationist myself, conservation work can be very isolating, and sometimes it seems hopeless. So I'm wondering, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you going in the morning besides coffee? And what's giving you hope in these days with climate change and all the changes it's bringing about?
So I'll tell you, after 25 years, and again, I'm going to go back to 25 years of working with fishers. First of all, the one thing that just lights up my day is if I get an opportunity to be in the water on a small boat, and I see sharks and finfish, and that just fills my bucket. But there's another thing too. It's after all these years, seeing that there is an impact, because I get WhatsApps all the day on every day on my phone from different fishers in different countries. Hey, Miss Rachel, look at this that I caught and I released it. I saw X, I witnessed Y. Hey, this is behaving funny. That makes my day. And that makes me realize, yes, indeed, there's that huge curiosity, that huge desire to do more for the sea. So the only reason why there are a lot of fishers, they don't necessarily want to, for example, fish sharks, they just don't have other options. So whenever I see that there's a desire for change, or there's been a behavioral change, or they're just contacting me because they want to share something that they're so excited about, and I'm equally excited, makes my day, makes my week. I get sent great hammerhead videos, silky shark videos. Look what I saw when I was out fishing for snapper, and it wasn't tagged. Do you think we can tag them next time? So that kind of stuff.
Amazing. Caleb would like to know if you think the work that you are doing with the fishermen could be applicable to end cage diving by transitioning people who run these cage diving agencies to something more sustainable.
So that's a really good question. So I'm not very familiar, actually. I'm somewhat familiar with the cage diving, but especially in the context of great whites. And I know that there's been some issues also in South Africa, primarily because we don't have the same predictability of the great whites because of the orcas, and Guadalupe Island in Mexico has been closed to great white diving. So I think there's still a bit of cage diving for maybe blues and makos. I think I don't want to step out on a limb because I'm not that familiar with the cage diving. It just all depends on how sharks behave, with how those species of sharks behave with people. It depends on the provisioning practices where you're actually feeding sharks. safe handling practices, and more. I think there's a lot of possibility. You look now at how many people go diving with Caribbean reefs and tiger sharks and hammerhead sharks, whereas before they'd be like, oh, I could probably only do this in a cage. So you're seeing shifts also in the tourism sector. I don't see that it's far off with blue sharks and makos, maybe. Maybe not with great whites. I don't know.
Perfect. Okay. Well, none of this work is free. As we all know, there's no free lunch. So I'm wondering if I'm sitting at home in where I am in Denver right now, what can I do as someone who's sitting in the US, and everyone who's watching right now, probably wondering, what can we do? How much is too little? How much can 100, if I had 100 in my pocket right now and I gave it to you, what can you do with that? 1,000, 5,000. I know conservation costs a lot, so what can we do? And what could 100, 1,000, 5,000 do for you?
That's a wonderful question, and I thank you for asking it. So any amount no amount is too small. But to give you an idea, for example, 100 would enable us to have enough gas to do monitoring for the day when we've got 8 fishers on board. So that's really key and critical. And we run, anywhere from about 90 days or more of monitoring a year in any particular country. $50 is going to help us to bring on a fisheries dependent monitor from the community and be able to provide them with utensils that they need to be able to monitor. 5,000 is amazing. 5,000 will actually cover the cost of tuition for 4 years for an local undergraduate student in many of the tropical countries where we work. And as I said, we have a scholarship program for the sons and daughters of fishermen, and 5,000 would cover one entire scholarship for 4 years. So, and we've got everything in between, including satellite tags, which are $2,000 to $5,000 each, which help you track the animals. And you can then see them online. We have, for example, a whole bunch of turtles that you can see online on our tracking page at the moment. So no amount is too small, and we really do love support and joining us. And on that point too is, don't forget, we have these incredible expeditions that help to support the monitoring, the fisher partners, and so much more, where it's hands-on. You learn a heck of a lot about species, behaviors, tools, and more over the course of a week that you're with us.
Thank you. Well, folks, thank you so much for staying till the end. Thank you, Rachel. And as you all just heard, you heard it here first. No amount is too little. So I know Megan has put the donate link in the chat. Do what you can. Every little bit counts, and we really appreciate it. Don't forget to join us for the next closer look on Friday, February the 16th, where the Pangolin Crisis Fund will be sharing their work. The chat also has a registration link. And also we have our Spring Expo coming up April 20th in the South Bay, and we hope to see those who are local. Actually, you can all travel. If we can travel from wherever Rachel is going to travel, you can all travel. So we hope to see you there. Rachel, do you have any last thoughts, any last comments that you want to say?
My comment is that of gratitude. Gratitude because I get to share this with all of you today. And I'm so thankful that you took time out of your day to come to this presentation and share this time with me. And I hope you learned a little something, and you've gone away a little bit more inspired and with some new thoughts. And I love recommendations, new thoughts, questions. So please don't hesitate. Do send them along our way. You can always reach us at info@maralliance.org. And we love volunteers and interns as well. It doesn't matter what your background, so don't forget, do reach out to us. So thank you so much to all of you for coming to this talk today.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.